Hello and welcome to this special broadcast. I'm Rohit Wellington Rajan. North Korea has claimed it has tested a new solid fuel intercontinental ballistic missile. Now, why is this important? If this is true, it marks a major breakthrough in Kim Jong-Un's banned weapons program. Testing the more technologically advanced solid fuel missile has been on Kim's wish list for a long time. Such missiles are easier to store and transport, they are more stable and quicker to prepare for launch, and therefore harder to detect and destroy preemptively. The country is in fact hailing the latest test as a move that radically promotes the country's nuclear counterattack capability. To discuss the possible ramifications of this move and the escalating tensions in the Korean Peninsula, we are now being joined by Dr. Robert Edwin Kelly, American political analyst on inter-Korean affairs and professor at the Department of Political Science at Busan National University. He is joining us from Busan in South Korea. Welcome to the broadcast, sir.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Dr. Kelly, let's first talk of the significance of this launch, acquiring the solid fuel ICBM capability. Some analysts have said that the missile's exhaust plume is consistent with solid propellant at work. Now, if this is true, how does this change the dynamics of what's going on in the Korean Peninsula?
Sure, I think the biggest thing that it will change is that it reduces the response time of the North Koreans should they decide to launch a nuclear weapon, right? In other words, because it's solid fuel, it's easier for that material, as you introduced, it's easier for that material to be maintained and doesn't take nearly as long to fuel the rocket, right? You know, you don't have sort of like pipes leading from trucks and putting fuel into the rockets, right? And so the ability of the North Koreans to launch more rapidly is really the big thing, right? Instead of waiting several hours while the trucks drive up and put the fuel in, right now you can just sort of put the package in and it launches. And so the concern is that if there is a crisis between the U.S. and North Korea, between North Korea and South Korea, right, there's less and less lag time. There's less and less time for each side to sort of make some moves that don't necessarily push it over the brink immediately. Instead, everybody can react more and more rapidly. If you think about the Cuban Missile Crisis, for example, you know, the Soviet ships were en route through the Atlantic Ocean for like a week, and they gave us time to sort of work things out. That kind of time frame is narrowing in Korea as the North Koreans build better and better technology.
Sir, even if North Korea pulled off this test, isn't there a difference or some distance between testing and credible deployment of such missiles?
Yeah, that's another big question out there. That's really sort of more among the technical community, right? To what extent do the North Koreans actually have what they say they have, right? And it's really hard for us on the outside to know this because the North Koreans don't share a lot of information with us. The few engineers from outside countries that have been into North Korea have had very, very limited access. The North Koreans don't share information. They don't belong to the International Atomic Energy Agency, for example. So don't really know, as you mentioned, we're sort of making these guesses based on photographs and what the North Koreans tell us and, random bits of video, from, somebody shoots the missile, photographs the missile sort of in the air above the Sea of Japan. That's really the kind of stuff that we're talking about, satellite information. But I mean, none of it is actually sort of like on the ground, people sort of opening these things. So I mean, it's really unclear. My own guess is the North Koreans probably have the ability to range targets throughout Asia and also reaching the United States. I think that's probably pretty established. I think the real issue is targeting. Can the North Koreans actually, when they say they can nuke New York or something, can they actually get the missile to land in New York City, or is it going to land, 200 miles away? I think that's really can they hit a specific target reference, a grid reference, and I don't know if that's the case.
Dr. Kelly, let's talk about that nuclear threat. South Korea and the United States, have been holding military drills, something that has rattled North Korea, which repeatedly raises the nuclear rhetoric. Now, is this just posturing, or is the nuclear threat real?
Well, I think the North Koreans don't want to start a war, right? I think the reason the North Koreans built these weapons is because they can no longer win a war traditionally defined. That is to say that the North Korean People's Army, the KPA, is very large, but the KPA is almost certainly obsolete. Most of its weapons are pretty old. The North Koreans lack a lot of the fuel necessary to drive their vehicles. For example, we know that malnutrition is a problem. We know that includes the Army. And so I think one of the reasons why the North Koreans have tilted so heavily into nuclear weapons in the last 15 years is that even though they have this big army, it's fairly obsolete if they were to fight a conventional war against South Korea and the U.S. They would lose. So I don't think the North Koreans actually want to launch an offensive strike against the United States. I don't think they're that reckless. They're not Putin in Ukraine. They're not Osama bin Laden. They're not nihilists, right? Because they don't want to die themselves. But I do think they would be willing to use them if we attacked North Korea. And that's probably the big benefit of the weapons, is they make it impossible for the United States to do a regime change operation, like the U.S. did in Iraq or in Libya. I think that's really the reason they built them, not to start a war.
Sure. Finally, let's also talk about de-escalation. What do you think can be done to calm the spiraling situation in the Korean Peninsula? We know how Japan also issued an evacuation warning yesterday when this launch happened. So how do you think we can calm the situation down?
Sure. I think the most important thing to do is actually to sort of resume talking to the North Koreans. That's very difficult because the North Koreans won't talk to us. There's not much we can do. Even during the years when Donald Trump was president and we were sort of talking to the North Koreans, they didn't actually offer a whole lot. I mean, it wasn't really clear that the North Koreans were actually interested in a major bargain where they gave up something substantial on their side to get something substantial from us. The North Korean position throughout the negotiations was pretty stiff, was pretty sort of unmoving, and now they're not talking to us at all. I do believe that probably the easiest way, if we do talk to them again, is to go for small, sort of bite-sized bargains, but that discuss a few small things and we build upwards. I think one of the reasons the Trump initiative failed is because Trump tried to sort of fix everything in one big shot, and the issues here are so complex and they're so deeply rooted that I just don't think that you can sort of fix Korea in one fell swoop. I think it really does require sort of small bargains about small issues, building up towards the nuclear weapon issue, because the North Koreans aren't just going to give up their nuclear weapons. They're not going to give them up for a pile of money or a U.S. embassy or something like that. That's not going to happen.
All right, Dr. Robert Edwin Kelly, thanks for joining us with your perspective.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, sir. And that's it on this special broadcast. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.